event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has inaugurated the 31st edition of the Algerian Production Fair here in Algiers, which is marked by the participation of 580 exhibitors. Algeria has called on all the Malian parties to renew their commitment to the agreement for peace and reconciliation in Mali, resulting from the Algiers process, which remains the ideal framework for resolving the crisis in the country. The Israeli occupation forces carried out several air raids in the north, center and south of the Gaza Strip, resulting in further massacres against the Palestinian people. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Osmani. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has inaugurated the 31st edition of the Algerian Production Fair here in Algiers, which is marked by the participation of 580 exhibitors. President Tebboune was accompanied by a large delegation made up of government officials. At the opening ceremony, the Minister of Commerce, Tayyip Zitouni, gave details to the President about the event. President Tebboune called for a conduct of a thorough survey to select the companies that have met the needs and demands of the population in order to give them permission to export to Africa, as in the year 2024, Algeria will open the trade exchange with Niger, Mali and Mauritania. The fair, which is being held under the 23rd of December, is organized under the aegis of the President of the Republic. This year's theme of this major economic event is the producing company, the basis of growth and economic development. The 31st edition of the Algerian Production Fair is marked by an increase in the number of participants, with 580 exhibitors compared with the previous year when 464 exhibitors took part, underlining the interest shown by national companies in this economic event that have worked tirelessly to mobilize all the marketing and advertising resources on offer and to compete on the national market. Now, President Abdelmajid Tebboune has chaired a preparatory meeting for the 7th Summit of Heads of State and Government of the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, scheduled to take place from the 29th of February to the 2nd of March 2024 here in Algiers. Now, Algeria has called on all the Malian parties to renew their commitment to the agreement for peace and reconciliation in Mali, resulting from the Algiers process, which remains the ideal framework for resolving the crisis in the country and preserving its sovereignty. According to a press release issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, it says, as MINUSMA, the United Nations Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, officially marks the end of its mandate in Mali this month of December, Algeria would like to express its gratitude to it, to the UN and to its Secretary General Antonio Guterres for the invaluable contribution and support they have made to the implementation of the Agreement for Peace and Reconciliation in Mali, resulting from the Algiers process, and to the promotion of peace and stability in this brotherly and neighboring country. Algeria takes this opportunity to reiterate its firm conviction that the said agreement remains the appropriate framework for resolving the crisis in Mali and for preserving by peaceful means the territorial integrity of Mali, its sovereignty and its national unity. The document said, adding that Algeria calls on all the Malian parties to renew their commitment to this collective work of peace and reconciliation in order to meet the legitimate aspirations of all the components of the brotherly Malian people for lasting peace and stability. Here in Algiers, the Secretary General of the Workers' Party, Louisa Hanoun, has called in Algiers for the strengthening of the internal front to counter any attempt to blackmail Algeria. At a press conference devoted to the issues discussed with the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, during the meeting which he granted her, Ms. Hannoun said that she had raised the need to strengthen our country's immunity and capacity to resist by resolving the problems that weaken it, by taking a series of measures, particularly in the social and political fields.
Regarding
the United Arab Emirates, it is present and it intervenes in the region, in Mali and in the whole Sahel region. It is present in Morocco and supports the Zionist entity and the aggression plans against us. This means the harassment against us. There are very heavy weapons that were sent to Morocco as part of this criminal plan. We have already expressed our position. We do not need the investments of the Emirates. First of all, because we are not a poor country. We are self-sufficient. They use the economic investments as a cover to interfere in our country, and perhaps they had more dangerous intentions to enter our institutions, as they do in Morocco, to see how they take over large lands in the south bordering Morocco. These are really hellish plans.
The Secretary General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the National Community Abroad, Lunas Magramen, has co-chaired in Stockholm, Sweden, with his counterpart, Secretary of State of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of Sweden, the Algerian-Swedish session of political consultations. The city of Oran will host the 10th high-level seminar on peace and security in Africa on Sunday and Monday, with the aim of making African diplomacy an accomplished and influential element in the interests of security and stability on the continent, according to diplomatic sources. Algeria is taking part in this meeting as the host country and initiator of the Oran seminar on the one hand, and as an incoming non-permanent member of the Security Council on the other. You're listening to Radio Algeria International. This is the English service, and as you followed in our top stories, the Zionist occupation forces carried out several air raids in the north, center, and south of the Gaza Strip, resulting in further massacres against the Palestinian people. Over the last few hours, the bodies of 196 people and around 500 others were wounded from several regions have arrived to hospitals. In the Gaza Strip, the number of people killed since the start of the Zionist aggression against the Palestinians on the 7th of October amounts to more than 18,600, and around 50,600 others are wounded, the majority of whom are children and women, while a large number of victims are still under the rubble. Now in the West Bank, 2 Palestinians were killed, including a minor, and several others were injured during an Israeli drone strike targeting the eastern neighborhood in Jenin city tonight, as the Israeli army continued its military offensive against the city and its camp since dawn on Tuesday. The new casualties raise the number of Palestinians killed during the ongoing Israeli offensive against Jenin to 10. More with Said Bouhazi.
A Wafa correspondent reported that 10 Palestinians were injured in the raid, including at least 3 seriously. The 2 Palestinians shot dead by the Zionist occupation forces were identified as Ahmed Jamal Abu Zainad, 27, and Bashar Haytham Abu Zaid, a minor. The Zionist forces also fired several Anaga anti-tank missiles targeting a number of houses in the neighborhood. Forces further blew up a house in the El Damj neighborhood in Jenin camp, setting it on fire. A resident told Wafa that the occupation forces surrounded his house and several other surrounding houses and forced him, along with his wife and children, to leave the house before they targeted it with an Anaga missile and a barrage of bullets, causing it severe damage. Occupation forces fired over 5 missiles targeting the houses they besieged after forcing their inhabitants to leave and subjected them to interrogations. They also raided and searched several homes in the eastern neighborhood and tampered with their contents, which led to the outbreak of violent confrontations, during which the occupation soldiers fired bullets and tear gas canisters at residents and their homes. Sources reported the arrival of new Zionist military reinforcements to the city of Jenin and its camp. Security sources told Wafa that occupation forces bombed a barbershop in Jenin camp using Anaga anti-tank missiles, destroying it and setting it on fire completely. Fatah Movement institutions and Ramana Village Council west of Jenin announced that they had provided shelter for 336 Palestinians who were released from occupation jails after being detained in the ongoing aggression on Jenin and its camp and were unable to return to their homes due to the extensive Zionist military presence in Jenin.
In his daily briefing on the situation in Gaza, the UN Secretary-General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric has stressed that the spread of diseases in Gaza has reportedly intensified, especially due to overcrowded living conditions and the collapse of the health system. Let's listen to him.
Situation in Gaza. Lynn Hastings, our humanitarian coordinator for the occupied Palestinian territory, briefed your colleagues in Geneva by VTC. She pointed to the need for a humanitarian ceasefire. Given the conditions on the ground, she emphasized that Israel needs to provide for unimpeded humanitarian access and to ensure that the conditions inside Gaza allow for the provisions of humanitarian aid. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that the spread of diseases in Gaza has reportedly intensified, especially due to overcrowding living conditions, which adds a strain, obviously, on the increasing overwhelmed health system and it increases the risk of people dying. The head of the WHO in the occupied Palestinian territory announced that cases of meningitis, jaundice, impetigo, chickenpox, and upper respiratory tract infections have now been recorded in Gaza. For the first time since the escalation from on October 7th, 8 trucks were screened at the Israeli-controlled Karim Shalom crossing and then allowed to enter Gaza through Rafah. While this should help alleviate some of the logistical delays, humanitarian agencies report this is not sufficient and are requesting that aid be allowed to transfer through Karim Shalom crossing.
That was the UN Secretary-General spokesperson Stefan Dujarric. The NGO Medical Aid to the Palestinians reported that 70 medical staff from the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, north of Gaza City, were arrested by Zionist occupying forces after the hospital was stormed on Tuesday. The NGO denounced the raid on the hospital and the arrest of 70 medical staff at an undisclosed location. 65 patients, including 12 children in intensive care and 6 babies in incubators, are still inside the hospital, as well as 45 medical staff. On Tuesday, 3,000 displaced people were also at the hospital. Speaking about displaced people, the Global Refugee Forum 2023 is taking place now at the Palexpo in Geneva, Switzerland. Addressing the 3-day forum in Geneva, the Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, said the current conflict not only leads to more civilian deaths and suffering, but also further displacement that threatens the region. He also called for an immediate and sustained humanitarian ceasefire.
A major human catastrophe is unfolding in the Gaza Strip, and so far the Security Council has failed to stop the violence. The events that have occurred in Israel and Gaza since the 7th of October are outside the mandate of UNHCR. Tragically, however, we foresee more civilian deaths and suffering and also further displacement that threatens the region. I cannot open the Global Refugee Forum without first echoing the call of the United Nations Secretary General for an immediate and sustained humanitarian ceasefire and the resumption, finally, of a genuine dialogue that once and for all end the conflict.
Filippo Grandi has called on donors to boost support for the growing numbers of people forced to flee their homes due to the conflict, crises and climate change.
I would be remiss if I did not mention that many humanitarian organizations are facing severe funding challenges. UNHCR alone is lacking $400 million to end the year with the minimum of needed resources, a shortfall we have not experienced in years, and we're all looking with much concern at 2024. Let me take advantage of this moment and of the presence of many generous donors to make the strongest appeal that you reinforce your financial support, because the state of the world is such, unfortunately, that you need strong humanitarian organizations.
For his part, Jordan's King Abdullah called for a more coordinated humanitarian response in Gaza and reiterated his country's commitment to supporting Palestinian refugees and the UN agency tasked with helping them, UNRWA.
My friends, just a few months ago, I stood before the UN General Assembly and urged the world not to forget Syrian refugees. And now, as we speak, we find ourselves dealing with another internal displacement crisis in the region. Over 1.9 million Palestinians in Gaza, many of whom are themselves refugees, have been forced to flee their homes amid a relentless bombing campaign. With all eyes on Gaza, the international community must recognize more than ever that Band-Aid solutions are no longer feasible, and that global crises demand long-term responsibility sharing. Jordan is pushing for a more coordinated humanitarian response in Gaza. We are supporting the Palestinians and UNRWA in any way we can, but our country is still bearing the heavy costs and burdens of the refugee communities in our midst.
Held every 4 years, the forum brings together decision makers and stakeholders from around the globe, including refugees themselves, to find solutions and pledge action for the world's refugees and the countries and communities hosting them. The International Federation for Human Rights has said that the Zionist entity is carrying out genocide against the Palestinian people, calling on the International Criminal Court, ICC, to issue arrest warrants against the perpetrators of this crime. Last week in Paris, after a long and thorough legal explanation or examination, the International Bureau of the organization, the elected body of legal experts and human rights defenders from around the world, adopted a resolution recognizing the Zionist entity's actions against the Palestinian people as genocide in progress. Saeed Bouazi has more.
The president of the International Federation for Human Rights, FID, Alice Mogwi, said that the Palestinians are suffering a constant, ongoing tragedy that is as unimaginable as it is deliberate, indicating that this level of violence orchestrated by an occupation force is genocide. To say that it is happening is to say that it can and indeed must be stopped. To political leaders and senior officials, we must underline that support and assistance to the Zionist entity is complicity in this ongoing genocide, she said. In this respect, the FID called on the ICC to immediately issue arrest warrants against those responsible for the crimes committed against the Palestinians. The organization pointed out that the Zionist army targeted journalists, medical personnel, ambulances, schools, places of worship, universities, shelters and hospitals. More than 60% of homes in Gaza have been destroyed, and the water, electricity, telecommunications and health infrastructures have been severely damaged, making living conditions almost impossible for the Palestinians. In Gaza, the blockade, planned famine, repeated forced mass displacements, the murder and mutilation of tens of thousands of civilians are now a reality. On 13 October, the FID sounded the alarm on the crimes committed by the Zionists, affirming that they could reflect a genocidal intent against the Palestinians. On 19 October and 2 November, experts from the United Nations also warned of the risk of genocide. This ongoing genocide threatens the entire Palestinian people. Today, Gaza is the focus of attention, but in the West Bank, communities have been forcibly displaced and others are threatened with the same fate. In the West Bank, Palestinians are killed on a daily basis. They are silenced. The colonial apartheid system of the Zionist entity sends a message that is as clear as it is permanent. If the apartheid regime is not dismantled and the crimes go unpunished, there is no future for the Palestinian people anywhere on their land, declared Diana Al-Zia, Vice President of the Fed.
Still with the Palestinian file, the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OCHA, has said that Gaza is facing a public health disaster due to the collapse of its health system and the spread of diseases as a result of the ongoing Zionist aggression. The United Nations and humanitarian groups have been sounding the alarm about the spread of infections, diseases in Gaza, where the internal displacement of 85% of the population has led to overcrowding shelters and other temporary accommodation facilities. Now, World Food Programme spokesperson Lenny Kinsley has warned of a looming hunger catastrophe by next year's lean season in Sudan if access and regular delivery of food assistance to people trapped in conflict hotspots is not expanded. She said a new analysis shows the highest level of hunger ever recorded during the harvest season.
The hunger crisis is deepening at an alarming rate, as a new integrated phase classification food security analysis has determined. Now, as many of you may be aware, the IPC is a widely internationally recognized 5-phase scale that provides common standards for classifying the severity of food insecurity. So this new analysis shows the highest level of hunger ever recorded during the harvest season, which is ongoing right now, and it's typically a period where more food is available. And if there's not a significant increase in food assistance, by the time the lean season arrives in May, conflict hotspots could see the emergence of catastrophic hunger, or level 5 out of 5, the highest level on the integrated phase classification scale. Nearly 18 million people across Sudan are facing acute hunger right now. This is equivalent to the entire population of the Netherlands, and more than double the number at the same time a year ago. This figure is also higher than the initial projection of 15 million, which was made in the previous assessment in August, which demonstrates just how rapidly the food security situation is worsening.
The 11 Security Council member signatories of the joint pledges related to climate, peace and security have said that Central Africa remains among the world's most vulnerable sub-regions to the impacts of climate change, with temperatures rising higher than the global average. Speaking to reporters, the representative of Switzerland had this to say.
We express deep concern regarding the increasingly severe adverse impacts of climate change on the peace and security of Central Africa, but also noting the enormous potential of Central Africa in the global fight against climate change and call for urgent action. Central Africa remains among the world's most vulnerable sub-regions to the impact of climate change, with temperatures rising higher than the global average, increasingly unpredictable rainfall patterns, severe droughts and floods, southward expansion of the Sahara Desert, the shrinking of Lake Chad, soil erosion along the coastline, and accelerated sea level rise in the Gulf of Guinea. The impacts of climate change can exacerbate intercommunal conflicts, including among farming, herding and fishing communities, and can contribute to migration and displacement, non-state armed group recruitment and crime in several areas across the sub-region, as well as piracy and maritime crime in the Gulf of Guinea.
Still with the topic climate, in a statement issued by the Secretary-General, said that COP28, the climate change conference in Dubai, occurred at a decisive moment. Speaking to reporters, the spokesperson of the UN Secretary-General, Stefan Dujarric, said,
The issues of the energy transition, the future of fossil fuels were front and center. The global stocktake clearly reaffirmed the imperative of limiting global temperature rise to 1.5, which requires a drastic reduction in global greenhouse gas emissions in this decade, Mr. Guterres said. In addition, for the first time, the outcome recognizes the need to transition away from fossil fuels after many years with the discussion of this issue was blocked. To those who opposed a clear reference to the phase-out of fossil fuel in the COP28 text, the Secretary General said that a fossil fuel phase-out is inevitable, whether we like it or not. Let's just hope it doesn't come too late, he added. Of course, he said timelines, pathways, and targets will differ for countries at different levels of development, but all efforts must be consistent with achieving the goal of global net zero by 2050 and preserving the 1.5-degree goal.
On December 14, 2013, passed away Abu al-Qasim Saadallah, a source of pride for Algeria, a prominent scientific scholar and one of its immortal cultural icons. Said Bougazi harks back to the main stages in the life of this brilliant Algerian scholar.
Abu al-Qasim Saadallah received his primary education in his hometown, memorized the Holy Quran, and drew inspiration from authentic values and culture. Thus, his love for Algeria, for which he spent his entire life looking for its progress and sovereignty, is engraved in his heart, whether by defending it, presenting its heritage, or contributing to its revolution. Once he said, "Revolution was pumping through my veins, accompanying me in my troubles and feelings." Seeking knowledge, he had been to various parts of the world, such as Tunisia, Egypt, the United States of America, and many other countries. He has always been superior to his peers and excelled among them. His genius appeared at an early age. Knowledge and work were sacred for him and considered the best way to reach his lofty goals, about which he said, "My pen is relentless. Writing for me is my sickness and remedy, my nourishment and my breath. I am contented when I write and get angry with my person when I don't, and the day goes as if it was stolen from my life." In 1965, he got his PhD in modern and contemporary history from the University of Minnesota in the USA. He came back to his homeland and worked at the Department of History at Algiers University as a teacher and trainer, researcher and supervisor of MA and PhD theses, as well as different historical researches. His activity did not impede him from moving between Arab and Western universities as a lecturer and contributing with his varied knowledge. In the beginning, he was interested in literature. He wrote in different literary genres, among which novel, poem, and essay, among others. He was unique and even an explorer, as confirmed by Dr. Ahmed Hamdi, who described him. He was the first to publish a collection of modern Algerian poems entitled "The Victory is for Algeria" in 1967. Afterwards, he studied history and got specialized in it. He carried out several researches and wrote different biographies, autobiographies, and others. Cultural History of Algeria is one of his publications in that field, composed of 10 volumes, and on which he said, "My research aims to yield a work that shows the contribution of Algeria in the Arab Islamic culture and humanity through the ages."